reduced, while those for higher energy using consumers have also been marginally increased. And as a result, he is one of the very, very few distribution companies in this country who breaks even. In other words, there are already existing models for moving towards sustainability. The next issue that I would like to focus on is those that are related to bringing in more renewables, more energy efficiency. The problem with all of these newer technologies is that they end up costing more. Their first cost, at least, is higher than the cost of substitutes. So if I set up a renewable energy, wind energy or a solar energy power supply plant, my first costs are higher, and actually, sometimes, or well, most of the times, even the levelized cost of electricity is higher than that from coal, at least today. Now, this is true of energy efficiency as well, where a more efficient light bulb will cost, for example, more than a less efficient one. But because of the energy savings, it pays back for itself in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Now, the challenge therefore becomes, how do we get more and more people to adopt these technologies sooner rather than later? This means enabling it now, and second, have a price reduction over the longer term. And therefore, the kinds of financial incentives and the kinds of innovation in technology and in business models that is needed is such that this early adoption and the longer term price reduction of energy efficiency and renewables continues to occur. So what are the kinds of models? We have seen in the wind sector that as far as taxation is concerned, accelerated depreciation has been very helpful. In the case of solar, the reverse bidding process has been successful in bringing down the cost of electricity procured from solar electricity from something like 18 rupees a kilowatt hour to something like 6.5 rupees per kilowatt hour. Good reduction, but is still some distance away from being completely competitive. Similarly, when we talk of energy efficiency, I think the best example is the area around us. Changing street lights to more efficient LED-based street lights makes great sense. However, municipalities don't have the resources to invest. They sometimes don't even have the resources to pay for the bills, and as a result, depend on subventions from the state government to pay their electricity bills. Therefore, either for the municipality directly or certainly for the state government, it makes great sense to move to more efficient lights because it reduces that burden quickly. Now, how do we make that happen? And again, Mr. Saurabh Kumar, who is actively, with EESL being actively involved in this process with WBSEDCL, correct? The Calcutta municipality and the state government would probably talk more about it, but suffice it to say that EESL invests, there is a reduction in the electricity bill, and then they get paid over a period of time from the savings that occur. Now, the problem today is that it takes a very long time for him to recover his costs. But the point is that as we do more and more of these, the costs come down, and therefore more can happen, and more players would be willing, not just public sector players, but private sector players would be willing to invest in these kinds of investments. We have seen, again, these kinds of interventions making huge differences. We saw a major transformation occur in the CFL market, where we saw prices decline, we saw volumes increasing. And we are now, I believe, on the threshold of a second lighting revolution where we move to LEDs. What I'd like to end with is three key messages. The first is that as a minimum, we need to ensure that all citizens in India have access to electricity, and access to electricity at prices that they are willing and able to pay. That's number one. The second is that we need to ensure that the pricing structure is such that it enables the distribution companies to be viable, and it enables consumers to be able to get electricity, an adequate amount of electricity at low enough prices, as well as adequate electricity if they want more than that minimum at prices that reflect the marginal costs of production. And the third is that we need to have innovative business models that allow the technologies such as renewables and energy efficiency, which bring down energy demand, which also enable the carbon emissions intensity to reduce, to move in and increase their share. I again thank the Bengal Chamber for this invitation, and to all of you for your patient hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur, for your address. You have given us a holistic view of not only the view, but the dynamics of the three major components on the demand side: energy management or energy efficiency, in terms of the policy, the technology, and the tariff. It was a very persuasive, very informative speech. Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your thoughts and advice. May I now request our Senior Vice President, Dr. Alok Rai, to please present a memento from the Bengal Chamber side to Dr. Mathur. This memento is actually the painting or the drawing made by one of the school children who participated at our sit and draw competition promoted by the Bengal Chamber. May I now request Mr. Anindo Chatterjee, Principal Consultant, Impact Assessment and Planning, ERM India Private Limited, to make a presentation on the theme paper for this morning, Sustainable Power, Unpacking the Buzzword. Mr. Chatterjee, please.
My presentation.
You found it? No. No, it's on the... Close it.
At the outset, very grateful to the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industries to have invited us. We have the privilege of participating in this conclave for the first time, and we hope to continue this association way into the future. Before I begin, it's always a daunting task to get on in front of a mic after people like Dr. Ajay Mathur have spoken, especially since we had such a large plethora of luminaries of people who spoke yesterday. So my presentation on the theme paper, which is there, is going to cover a lot of the key points which were already made yesterday. And we'll also look at, and when I finish, I will leave you all with two thoughts. Let's get on with the presentation. We need some perspective on India's growth and energy needs. We're the third largest economy in terms of the purchasing power parity. Our primary energy consumption has more than doubled from 1990 to 2012 in roughly 12 years' time. We are today the fourth largest energy consumer in the world. In the next few decades, the center for energy demand will be shifting from OECD countries to India, China, and Saudi Arabia. If we have to meet our aspirations of a 9% growth in GDP, our energy supply needs to grow 4 to 5 times, and our generation capacities need to grow 6 to 7 times. We're talking about a country of 1.2 billion people. We are talking about a country where more than 400 million people as we talk today are living in darkness. That's the scale of challenge that we're talking about. So, what are the challenges? Energy security, definitely. More importantly, addressing the social development, health, safety, and environment needs of the people. Ensuring sustainability of energy supply, a lot of what Dr. Mathur has already spoken about. So, our installed capacity, it has grown tremendously. It has grown 77 times from the first 5-year plan. We are looking at the figure which is there on the board. In terms of the contribution of our installed capacities, is it coming? The state sector accounts for about 40%. Is it? Sorry, there's some technical glitch and we'll just sort it out. It's coming on again. Yeah. So in terms of how it stacks up, the state contributes to about 40% of our installed capacity, and the private sector growing very quickly, 32% of it, and the central government about 28%. This is as per the Ministry of Power's estimates in 2013. If you take a look at the graph which is there below, just reinforcing the point which was made, coal accounts for, look up, this is one. Yes. Coal still accounts for the major fuel source through which we get our electricity needs. Hydro comes second. It has grown, but over the last 10, 15 years, it has remained fairly stagnant. The good news is that renewables is growing. I'm just trying to give an overview of where we stand right now. So, by fuel source, we have about 59% of our dependence on coal. hydro accounts for about 17% and renewables 12. So, and essentially the point that we are making is we did a comparison between fuel source to electricity generation across the BRICS countries, and the point that comes across very clearly is even within the BRICS countries, we are trying to use the resources that we have to ensure that the base load, as Dr. Arup Roy Choudhury spoke of yesterday, is dependent on what we already have. Unfortunately, what is happening in India is, as you already know, the coal sector is going through a lot of crisis. So we are in a situation where the supply of coal is going to be severely restricted in the near future unless some steps are taken immediately. We talk of renewables. The distribution of renewables is about 67% of it is wind, 7% solar, 13% roughly biogas and small hydropower. The Planning Commission says that we have consistently been about 10% short in our demand versus supply situation vis-a-vis energy. At peak hours, it goes down to almost 14%. 400 million people are out of this net, essentially. So we need to contextualize really what we mean by sustainable power within our context. Internationally, the focus has been to equate sustainable power with renewable energy. Primarily, the drivers are reduced dependencies on conventional hydrocarbons and the need to promote a cleaner fuel-based energy sources. But as we speak today, is that realistically possible? If you take a look at the table below, it's a comparison between the source of energy, the kind of gestation periods which are there, the land requirements and the cost of generation. The table clearly points out that coal still is the cheapest and the most reliable source. There is really, and it will be in the foreseeable future. So in our context, what is it that we are trying to say in terms of sustainable power? We are trying to say that we want to consciously delink the preoccupation with the type of fuel source. We need to be looking at what we have, use it more efficiently, use it in a manner which is more cost effective. To reinforce the point which Dr. Mathur made, we have to consciously encompass a judicious mix of conventional sources and renewables, and as we go along, renewables taking a larger share, obviously. We need to understand the major challenges which are there, which have been highlighted through yesterday and just some time back in Dr. Mathur's presentation. And what we need to really be conscious about is, are we going towards an energy secure future? Some of the major challenges, and this is the kind of work that my company does, is mostly with impact assessments and planning processes. Some of the major challenges that we have seen through our own experiences relate to land acquisition and rehabilitation. Unfortunately, the curse of resources is a reality. Coal is present in areas which are usually the poorest, usually in tribal lands, and it comes with a whole host of challenges. There are social, environmental, health and safety issues related to each of these sources. There are enormous regulatory impediments there. We keep talking about generation without thinking very consciously about how do we transmit and distribute. Does our infrastructure support this sort of carrying the electricity from where it's generated to your households, And there are losses in that as well. The leaky bucket syndrome is very, very true. Then comes the issue of who's actually managing it at the state level. The state utilities are in a critical state when it comes to finances. I'm not going to dwell on all the challenges which are there because they've been talked upon at length through yesterday and today, but 2 or 3 issues which are really relevant. On land acquisition, resettlement and rehabilitation. Usually we've seen that this requirement, this challenge which is being faced is dealt with as a checkbox by companies who actually go out into generating it. Are we really talking to the people who own the land? An excellent example was Raj Mahal yesterday, Mr. Partha Bhattacharya was mentioning, where the community's consent was sought much before the first brick was laid, the first hole was dug in the ground. The infrastructure was laid out, the consent was there. The communities actually became partners in the development process. Most of the times, this is not the case. We look at people who own the land on which the resource is based as a hurdle, as an impediment. If you recall Medha Patkar's speech, people are at the center of the development process really. But are they really at the center when it comes to making these investment decisions? These are questions that we really have to ask ourselves. There are issues related to ecology and biodiversity which are now coming in the picture. They have not even been considered. It was not there in the mind space of people up to the last decade. And we're very happy that it is coming because we have to look at not just plain vanilla environment impact assessments and social impact assessments and what is a baseline today and what is the change tomorrow. But over a period of time, over an investment cycle, is there any change? After that, what is required? The Land Acquisition Act talks about market valuation and payment of compensation. Does that end there? Does that really end there? Should it really end there? That's the question that we want to ask ourselves. Respect for customary rights. How many times do we really make an effort to understand the customary rights, the cultural heritage of the religious heritage of communities, especially the poorest and the most vulnerable ones, from whom we are taking the land? What is the kind of mechanism that we look at to make them partners in the development process? Is payment of compensation enough? Does the responsibility end there? In terms of the regulatory hurdles, and there are several governance issues related to this, to energy security, which are being tackled at various levels. But many a times there is an issue that environmental concerns and development concerns are at loggerheads. And it's actually platforms like this where some amount of dialogue happens, but unfortunately it stops. How do we take that forward? How do we create those platforms where diverse interests come on the same board, speak with one another, learn from one another, and design policy mechanisms, policy prescriptions, which take into account each other's wisdom and experiences. There is a new thing which is happening in the area of impact assessments, as I said some time back. Moving away from plain EIAs and SIAs to looking at it more comprehensively over a longer duration. So cumulative impact assessments is now actually a key. Looking at how to enforce guidelines, there are several already. There are others which will be coming on board. But enforcement is really very weak, very, very weak. The plethora of agencies that are there whose consent and clearance you need before you actually start off work are often not talking to each other. And your investment periods are getting delayed because of that. When we talk of sustainability, yesterday it was very interesting, where in Rajmahal, Mr. Partho Bhattacharya mentioned that they linked the KRAs of the mine managers with sustainability related outcomes. Many a times we talk about it quite a lot, but when it comes down to operationalizing it, at the end of the day, it's a person who is entrusted with the responsibility, a person, a team. If they don't understand the concept, if they don't understand what needs to be done, it just remains as talk. It doesn't get translated into action. Understanding community interventions which are needed, really looking at needs assessment in a very critical way and addressing them, maybe via your CSR, maybe via other mechanisms, whatever they might be. Lastly, on this point, the knowledge base is still weak. We really don't have a nationwide database, let us say, of the large projects which have happened, what had been the baselines, what were the impacts that were anticipated, what were the mitigations, what are the lessons that we have learned. It happens in discrete intervals over platforms like this when we discuss, when we talk. But again, translating that into action is really, really an important issue. That's finally, if you don't act, really you're not going to get any outcomes out of the process. So, I'll leave the floor for the other speakers, but I want to leave you with two thoughts. We keep talking about people, planet, and profits. And there is a logic to that sequence. People first, planet second, profits will follow. The second thought is, sustainability now is no longer a warm and fuzzy concept, feel-good factors. It's become an essential survivor's strategy. And the businesses which have actually picked that up, for instance, ITC gave us a wonderful presentation yesterday on what they have done in terms of resource creation, not just conservation, not just efficiency of use, but creation of those resources. So these businesses are looking 50, 100 years into the future. And we have really taken our planet on lease from our future generations. Do we want to leave it a worse off place than what we inherited? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee, for your very erudite presentation. Now we come to the real high point of the deliberations this morning, and we have a galaxy, literally a galaxy of energy leaders from the industry, from the government, from EBTC, which is an international organization who are transferring technology to India. And we are particularly happy that Mr. Nigam could join us this morning, because he would play a vital role, I would imagine, in the discussion process. And we are also very happy that Dr. Mathur has agreed to chair this. And I think this will be a most wonderful and